Okay, hey guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. We want to make sure and be respectful of Senator Kirt's time. Thank you all for minding your email instructions and getting here quickly. There's some construction going on in the Skirvin, obviously, so I'm not planning on using a microphone. I don't believe Senator Kirt is either, but if it gets too loud, we do have microphones. But I'm hopeful that you guys can hear us okay. Can everybody hear okay? All right. Thanks so much for being here this afternoon. We are live streaming on Facebook, so just FYI for your comments and questions later. They will be part of a public discourse. We're also hoping to house this on our YouTube channel. I know there were a bunch of folks that wanted to come that weren't able to, so we want to give them a chance to check out the conversation. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Just to give you a little rundown of how things are going to go, the senator's going to share some stuff with us for a little bit this afternoon, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So we'll have plenty of time for you to jump in, ask your questions. The goal today is for this to be a dialogue, to have a conversation. So I'm hoping once we get to the Q&A, not only do you have questions, but actually we can get into a little bit of back and forth. We've not done a legislative update in a little while, and so I think this is a really fun opportunity, and we're so thankful that you're here to do it with us. So for those of you that don't know, Senator Julia Kirt was elected to the Oklahoma Senate in 2018, which is crazy. Kirt represents District 30, including parts of Northwest Oklahoma City, Bethany, and War Acres. During her first term, Kirt helped lead improvements in access to mental health treatment as a founding member and co-chair of the Legislative Mental Health Caucus. Senator Kirt also served as co-chair of the Waiting List Caucus, which connects families, service providers, and lawmakers to move the needle towards robust, inclusive disability services. Before her election, Senator Kirt led statewide arts and culture nonprofit Governor's Award for her leadership of Oklahomans for the Arts and the Oklahoma Visual Arts Coalition. Kirt graduated from Leadership Class 21, testing my Roman numeral skills there. She's an active, did I get it right? Okay. She's an active volunteer leader in many educational and community organizations, quite honestly, too many to name. In fact, she graduated from the University of Oklahoma with a master's in art history and McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota with a bachelor's. Kirt lives in Oklahoma City with her husband, Nathan Guilford, and their 2 children. Please help me welcome my state senator and Oklahoma Rugby Hall of Fame member, Senator Julia Kirt.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really glad to see you all. I see a lot of old friends and constituents, and that makes me extra happy. If you know that you're my constituent, raise your hand. Yay! Okay. It is extra special because when you're like elected to represent specific people, there's like an extra special connection to like, I'm trying to be their voice in the state capitol. So this kind of came about because I was pestering Ashley because I feel like at the state level that y'all's voices are missing. Honestly, I said to her, that kind of thinking that I see in folks who are involved with ULI is what I don't see at the state level. So this is why, and I didn't mean that for that to me to end up speaking, but I'm glad to be here. But I just basically was like, how can we get y'all more involved with state issues? Because I think that it can be a little unwieldy. Actually got me a dry erase board. I did not, however, I've always wanted to have architect-style handwriting. Like, you all have that awesome, cool handwriting, but I will not take the time to learn, so it's going to be kind of brutal. But I just want to make sure we're on the same page, because I didn't go to high school in Oklahoma, so I missed out on Oklahoma civics and history, and so I had to catch up later. Okay, so, bad start. Okay, so Senate in Oklahoma has 48 members for 4 years each. We each get 4 years terms. I found that one out the hard way when I congratulated my senator at the time, David Holt, on his 6-year term, and he was like, no. And then the House, we have, strangely, 101 members, and they each get 2 years. So just the basics on that. I don't know if you know, but there were some real problems with representing urban areas for many, many years in Oklahoma up until the late 50s, early 60s. They would like have Oklahoma County represented by 2 people. And then the rural folks, like they might represent 8,000 people. So when redistricting started, things have started shifting since then. And now really the legislature is primarily ex-urban, suburban, and urban. but still thinks like it's rural dominated, I'll say. People still think of themselves as rural legislators, but I represent about 83,000 people, and House members represent about 38,000 people each, just to give you a sense of that. Redistricting happens after the census every 10 years. Okay, so we know that basics. So as you can imagine, the Senate view ourselves as the upper chamber. The House, they're out trying to run for re-election all the time. So they are constantly worrying about what's next. A state question in the 1990s made a 12-year term limit total. So no one can serve more than 12 years in our legislature. And, you know, there has some upsides. You know, at the time, it got rid of one person who was very corrupt, and people thought it was going to lead to a change. But the big challenge with this is there's not any institutional memory in the actual elected offices. And our planning horizon and, like, horizon of our impact is real short. In fact, most people really think in these increments, right? So at the state level, when you're making decisions, if you only know you're going to be there 4 years, or you're going to have to answer for getting something done in 2 years, that really leads to a lot of this, like, kind of Groundhog Day mentality of, like, constant changes. So anyway, just making sure you know those things. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to talk about the dates, just so you know where we are right now. Okay, so any legislative session is, the basic structure is the same every year. We file as many bills as we want. People are always like, what in the world's going on? It's because we actually are allowed to file as many bills as we want. They just won't all get heard because there's not enough time, thank goodness. We're officially a part-time legislature. January to May is our session, so everything has to get heard within a 4-month time period, right? So there's committee deadline, floor deadline, and then things cross over. And people often ask me, why do people file so many unconstitutional bills? Just so you know, that's our prerogative. I'm not kidding. Like, the staff might tell you, like, this bill might have constitutional problems, and they can just say, I don't care, right? And so, like, you've seen a lot of legislation that's purposely trying to test the judicial system. They even say that sometimes on the floor. So anyway, if you wonder why there's so many unconstitutional bills, it's because we just are pushing the boundaries all the time, right? Okay, so I just want to tell you where we are. So House committee, then the floor committee. So there's a deadline for each of these, like, benchmarks. And we've made it through these. So we've made it, any House bills have had to come off the House floor, and any Senate bills have had to come off the Senate floor. And then it starts over. So they'll go, we're seeing House bills are coming to the Senate starting next week, and vice versa. The next couple of deadlines, just so you know, are April 24th for this opposing deadline. And then this last one to get off the floor on the other side is May 8th. And then the big day that we all care a lot about is May 30th, which is the constitutional end of session. We can't go past that. And the Oklahoma State Legislature has a mandated balanced budget. So, like, if you hear politicians at the state level talking about running a deficit, we don't. We're not allowed to do that. It's not. Thank goodness, at some point they put that in the Constitution that we can't do that. So we have to get everything done and balanced by May 30th, or else we end up in a special session. Now, you notice I forgot somebody here, because he gets forgotten in the process a lot. Or maybe he excludes himself, is usually what happens. So he decides he doesn't, I need a different color for him, but oh well. Okay, so if things make it all the way through, then they make it back across. Whatever. So this is when I need an architect to draw this, right? It goes off the floor back to the governor. If there's no changes, once it's made it through both sides, it goes to the gov. If it does have changes, it has to come back to the first place. So that might be amendments or substituted language, that kind of stuff. The governor vetoes it. 2/3 majority can override his veto. In past years, that's happened pretty widely. Right now, there's a lot of divisions in the Republican caucus, so 2/3 is going to be harder to come by for a lot of things. But right now, there's a whole discussion going. I'll just tell you the main discussions at the Capitol this year, and it's like political waves that happen, and it's, you know, kind of coming from the people, but it's also federal government and Fox News that drive a lot of our waves that we ride on. Wind, there's a big anti-wind movement happening in the state. We think it's, pushed by out-of-state oil and gas money. I'm telling the online people, I don't know that for sure. But there's been a big movement in rural Oklahoma to be mad about wind and the expansion of wind energy and not wanting wind turbines in their area. And so there's these bills moving through that would limit wind. The wind industry would very much limit property owners' use of their own property. And they have a lot of stuff around setbacks and that kind of thing. So there's been a lot of trying to educate people about the new energy economy, how it doesn't actually harm oil and gas, and how that's been one of our advantages. But it's like Groundhog Day. We're starting all over again. We have 12 new members in the Senate. We have, I don't know, a dozen or more new House members, and so everybody's learning from scratch again. And so they're pushing these things forward. So wind, tax cuts is the other big thing. So the governor's still promising income tax cuts. Doesn't seem to care what the numbers say right now, and so there's still active conversations about the tax cuts. And then there is an Oklahoma-level DOGE thing happening, which is supposed to be announcing things in the next couple of days. So I think what we look at is a pretty uncertain environment. Like, I've been up there for 6 years. This is probably the biggest year of unknown, right? Because we don't really know what's going to happen with the economy. We don't really know what's going to happen with federal spending. So I think we're making decisions a little bit in a vacuum. But that leads me to my next statement, which is the state does not have a planning division at all. Any of y'all have worked at the state probably know. Like, that's what I miss from municipal government, because the planning department is kind of the governor. It might be kind of commerce. Nobody's really charged with big picture, long-term thinking. Nobody's really charged with bringing together that collaboration that's needed. I don't see that happening at the state level. So what you see is a lot of scrambling around, right? So that's one of the reasons I brought up needing you all, because I feel like that, like, thinking of new ideas really only happens when either special interests bring them forward or a member gets excited about something. So by telling all this, I'm not trying to make you cynical. I'm not, I promise. I'm just trying to be real about how it works. And one of my worries is that I think it's easier to be engaged at the municipal level because it's so much closer to us, and we can go talk to, Lisa Chronister and tell her what we think about her ADU policy she's working on. But
Lisa, would you like to?
Do you want to give a little primer about it? Yeah. But like at the state level, like, I think the state employees are frequently behind the scenes, and then the state leaders are not encouraged to think long term. I don't think they are. And innovation really comes out of private sector lobbying, I would say, more than anything. There are some legislators who take the time to really try to learn about subjects, but I'm saying it's 101 House members, 48 senators doing that at kind of like, we get to choose what we want to focus our attention on, right? All right, so I gathered a list of kind of housing or municipal level topics. You guys may think of some other things, but big things that we're talking about. Homelessness. This one has a huge divide between rural and suburban and rural and urban legislators. I would say suburban have a real specific view on it, and rural think they don't have any homeless people. They don't realize they do. They think everyone's from out of town if they're homeless. And they think that, a lot of them think that OKC and Tulsa should just deal with this, and literally are trying to ship people to the municipalities to deal with this. Okay, so homelessness. Lots about property taxes and assessment. Lots of concerns about fixed income folks, ability to deal with changes in valuations. I don't think there's a whole lot of asking county government what they need or asking local communities what they need financially. And as you know, cities have a lot of constraints about what kind of revenue streams they can get. So we have a lot of challenges there. But like freezing, they were looking at freezing property taxes for everyone over a certain age, regardless of income levels. We've already frozen, we already have a property tax exemption for disabled veterans, but the state only reimburses it in counties that have a really high number of veterans. So for instance, Larry Stein estimates Oklahoma County loses something like $18 million a year on those exemptions. And a lot of them are $1 million homes or higher, and so he's always asking, like, shouldn't we cap that? But that was actually a state question. So anyway, state assessments. Lots of things about building trades. There's an idea, a lot of concerns about whether licensure is helpful or not, and regulation in general. Like just last week, we were debating a bill that's supposed to make it easier for people to become journeyman plumbers. And, of course, from the plumbing industry, they're very concerned about undermining training and standards. And so I think a lot of time, any kind of mindset around that businesses also need to meet standards can be an issue. So architects have to fight all the time for their scope of practice. Everybody's up there fighting for that. Of course, zoning, code enforcement, preempting basically anything we can, right, Edmund? We love to preempt unless it affects us, and we don't want to preempt, right? HOA, so this is an interesting one. This is really what the most sacrosanct level of government is in Oklahoma? HOA. I'm serious. Because people view it as like a voluntarily entered contract, and tough luck on you if you sign one you don't like, right? But HOAs, like what kind of information they have to release, what kind of terms they're allowed, and then I already said property taxes. Oh, and then eminent domain is the other big one. We saw tons of bills related to this, and a lot of this is fears of public use. So anger about the Turnpike project and the way it was rolled out. Frustrations about things like that. We hear a lot from the city of Oklahoma City about some of these changes that would be real hard, would make things very difficult. And I think there's always that balance on personal property versus those. So anyway, those are some of the big picture issues. Now, I would say these from all different angles. Like a lot of these bills are, I would say, not necessarily well vetted. They frequently come from like one person's constituent, or they come from one interest group. So I think the ability for folks to enter these conversations with a more well-rounded view would be really helpful. Does that make sense? So for instance, we're going to add a crime for stealing a shopping cart, knowing who they're targeting. Okay, well, who's that going to impact? I mean, we know it's going to impact law enforcement. It's going to impact our jails. Who else is it going to impact down the road? Having a better understanding of those consequences. And I think a lot of times we defer only to the short-term mindset. So, for instance, folks lobbying last year about folks not being able to camp by highways. Their big thing was they don't want to see it. They don't want to see it, right? And my contention was, well, if you don't have them there, they're going to be in my neighborhood, trying to get in that vacant home or the abandoned home. And so not necessarily always thinking about the next step of the policy, if that makes sense. I wanted to mention just a couple of bills. I don't know. So there's several bills still alive that relate to code violations, camping, et cetera. I can give you all bill numbers if you want, but that may be deeper than you need. Some things are dead that I think relate to things you all identified as interests. One, there was a tax credit that was specifically about converting a vacant and abandoned property to residential. It needed a whole lot of work to be a good bill because it was real broad. But I think the mindset around how could we, in fact, encourage abandoned property to become usable. There was an elimination of parking minimums bill that Senator Hicks has run for several years. I mean, OML adamantly against that just because they don't want to be preempted on that. And then I ran a housing commission bill that I really liked because I'm trying to get us to talk in a more broad and holistic way. And so it was a housing commission bill to bring together housing authorities, so we're talking about low-income housing, but also private developers, our tribal partners, and cities to look more broadly at how do we work together to make sure we have the housing we need at different levels. We were dealing, just to give a little sample, during American Rescue Plan and CARES, we ended up with a big surplus at the state level because of we thought we were going to have to cut budgets during COVID, didn't cut them as much, and then a bunch of federal money came in that's, I wouldn't say it's supplanted because that's not legal, but made possible for us to have surpluses. And we put $215 million into a housing stability fund. And I will say that my colleagues did not have the temperament to put any money into housing from our American Rescue Plan. And if anyone wants the long story on that, I can tell you about it. But nobody was wanting to put American Rescue Plan money there. But a couple of lobbyists did a really good job of convincing them to put some of the surplus money into this program, and kind of came up with it at the last second, as far as I can tell. For a $215 million, I was kind of shocked how quickly it came together. And that money went to the Housing Finance Agency and is being used for down payment assistance, zero interest loans, and maybe one other thing. But I'll tell you that developing the program was very quick and did not involve, did any of you all give comment? Some of you might have given comment. There wasn't a whole lot of time there to work it out, though. And then I would say, looking at how that money's been invested and making any revisions to the program is not happening. And what I hear is one leader, one budget leader has an idea, this person has an idea, and it's just specific special interests that are pulling. And meanwhile, we have this pot of money, right, that we could be using to develop more affordable housing. And it's not happening. And we almost started subsidizing very large single-family homes. And so there was this big, like, okay, nationally that might be considered, lower income, but it's not for our state, right? So this is where I think we need to have that more regular conversation with plans and strategies across the state. So anyway, the Housing Commission bill, I did get it through committee, but I couldn't get it heard on the floor. And I'll say, I'm beginning to get the conversation going that it's a part of economic development. I think we're beginning to get that conversation, but it's very nascent. There's very few people that view those things as connected. And anytime I bring up housing in the building, they think we're talking about, giving people housing forever or something. Not that the market's broken and there may need to be interventions in various places. But then we had a possible gargantuan industrial investment that was going to go into the industrial park there. They were talking about building thousands of homes out by it. And was the government, the state going to build those homes? And so, I mean, when you talk about there's not enough homes to grow a community or grow the economy, I think that that's a concern that we need to actually address. Anyway, so that's my big picture view on it. It may be more geeky than you wanted, but I am anytime glad to talk about any of these conversations. I think at the state level we have, strong voice for OML, but OML is balancing 1 million interests all the time, right? We have county folks, but they're not really planners or economic developers. We have very strong voice for economic developers and chambers. Realtors are very present, but you don't have that. I would say that we don't have the amount of voices we need at the Capitol. A little bit from architects, but they're usually trying to defend themselves from attacks, so they're not like up there advocating for, big changes, right? Yeah. Anyway, so your voice is needed is my point.
That's great. That's great. Let's just thank Senator Kirt for running us through all of that. I think that's a great start to the conversation. So I'm going to ask her a couple of quick questions while everybody gets their questions ready to go. And then we'll just kind of open it up to the room. So you mentioned that there are voices and perspectives that are underrepresented, and I think that can go a variety of different directions, but let's say that people in this room are underrepresented in that conversation. So how can we get more involved? How can we help bring our voices to the table?
Well, I mean, the number one thing is knowing your senator or your rep, and knowing that it is entirely your right and duty to tell them what you do and bug them regularly. And be consistent. I mean, I know who Sean is because he writes me often, right? And he tells me, and he gets me to think about things that I might not have been thinking about. I actually had one constituent when I started who was really obsessed with solar, like thought that solar was the answer for almost every problem, like problems with funding in schools, solar. Like, I mean, every health problem, solar. And so he got me to learn a whole lot more about solar because he was real consistent about pointing it out. So I think don't feel like you have to know about everything that's going on. Just make sure you know your folks and you're telling them what you are very interested in one way or other.
Yeah, I think that's great. So you talked about a bill that you were able to get heard through committee. I think that sounds like a great opportunity to put together a commission of people. I think a conversation we often have is, the Oklahoma communities are grappling with housing attainability and affordability across the state. At every type of city. And so what policy tools do you think, I think your commission's a great idea, what other ideas are you hearing that you think can make actually a real impact that we could come maybe help support?
Yeah, I mean, I do think getting it on the agenda of other aid organizations that advocate would be number one. So like I mean, the fact that some chambers have started to add housing to their list. City of Oklahoma City added housing stability to their priority list. You know, I don't know who within the city was advocating for that, but they're now speaking up on eviction issues and some of that, which is huge, right? But so number one, that would be getting it on the agenda of more things. What I hear is a real interest in things that are more incentive-based rather than more carrot than stick, right? So when you're talking about anything that would preempt local municipalities, there's a lot of sensitivities to that for good reason. But that if we could look more towards incentive opportunities, I think that would be more positive. Now, short-term money's going to be tight. It just is, unless something drastically changes in the next couple of months. But I've had a lot of conversations, for instance, with a colleague about Utah has a pretty great housing commission they put together that has strong representation from realtors, city leaders, et cetera. They do an incentive for municipalities to do good planning on affordable housing and give them like 10 different metrics that they can work from. So it's not saying you have to zone this way or you have to do this thing, but it's here's some different ways to do a better job about having housing at different price points. And then they give preferential funding for infrastructure to those cities. So they can choose if they need it for, you know, water infrastructure, sewer infrastructure, roads, whatever. Utah has chosen to do it with that carrot. And I think that's going to be more popular here than something that's where it's a mandate.
Yeah.
So, I was shocked to learn how little we mandate in our state statute for cities and counties. Not counties. Counties get a ton. Huge cities have a lot of expectations around planning, but actually our smaller communities have very few requirements. And in Utah, they have a lot of requirements for local and county government, so they were able to just add this kind of planning into that. We don't even require a lot of that, so yeah.
That makes sense. Let's open it up to questions. Who has a question
or comment?
I got a question or a comment. I got a whole list of them here, so I'll keep going, but I want to see if anybody in the room has a question or a comment. Any of these bills that you would like to hear more about?
I have a comment. I actually emailed you a couple times. You responded, so I appreciate that.
Are you the single stair? Yeah.
And I think this is a good group to like bring it up in front of. I would think other developers, architects, builders would be for like single stair reform. And I get that's kind of nerdy. Where you're like, I might not know what that is, but single stair reform and also the HB 1847 that was allowing IRC building up to sixplexes under the IRC. And I think that piece might have gotten pulled and it's just daycare now. I'm not sure, but
yeah, I think it is.
You're talking about incentives, which I kind of agree. More incentives, carrots over stick, but also removing some of these, frankly, like just unhelpful regulations. And I'm not like, hey, deregulate everything.
Yeah.
It's just like these are not helpful to building more affordable housing because I largely think of housing as a supply issue. I don't think it's the only way we should attack it, but enabling the building of more housing. And when 97% of the city is, R1, which you can't really do anything about at the state level, I get it. But a couple things like that. I don't know if this room, like ULI, people kind of support the IRC stuff and single stair.
I mean, I'd be interested to look at that because I think that a lot of that, I imagine there's a lot of fear about opening some of those up. Like we use national standards sometimes just to avoid having that conversation locally because, for instance, I'm pretty sure that every church in rural America would love to build a gargantuan metal building without an architect or without anyone, and would that be safe? And so I think that balance would be hard. Like if you open it up, who would be willing? I don't know.
Austin, are there other cities or states that you know of that have?
There's like 10 states working on single stair reform right now.
Yeah.
It's allowed all over the world. Like we're like so uniquely dumb in how we do it. And around certain areas around fire. And if you look at how the IBC has created the International Building Code, which is what governs commercial codes, there's almost no builders involved. It's special interests, it's lobbyists, it's a 506 whatever. See, it's a nonprofit that then it just kind of gets forced down on states and people just accept it because they're worried. They're worried about like, well, I don't want to not accept the national standard, but it's not actually a national standard, and it's not the International Code Council. It's just America and Canada. And so there's a lot of things that I think we could do that are really sensible. That you have examples not only all around the country but over the world. That could be really sensible that are like not partisan issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think reducing regulation is very popular at the Capitol. I think the big challenge would be balancing it with the, firefight. There is a strong voice for fire and first responders. So,
And I get that part of my issue with firefighters. It's really hard to, if I critique firefighters, like, you hate firefighters. No, but like, you can't argue with firefighters because it's, whoa, they're seen as the experts, but like, they also don't have to build anything. And like, so we have to have a holistic conversation about these things. I mean, we've got the largest fire trucks in the world, and we have 200-foot hose reach that has incredibly limiting factors that are, it's really hard for people to see, but like, how do we have those conversations in front of people? Because I think really sensible people, we have very logical conversations about it.
Yeah,
it's not about just deregulating. It's very
I admit that I set your email in my read it in the interim and learn more, because I don't know who at the state level is driving those decisions. I imagine it's the licensure boards. They tend to be the only ones looking at like a lot of that, but it'd be interesting to look at. We just approved a couple of people for the Fire Marshal's Commission, but that's really for non-incorporated areas, so I actually don't know who would, or if anyone's proactively thinking about it. I'm not sure. So that would take some research on my part. Yeah.
So I will kind of interject something if you want to help with that. Do you follow the Uniform Building Code Commission for Oklahoma?
Yes.
Okay, right. So they do have like special committees that
Right.
you can participate in for giving like recommendations for amendments to the
Right.
code that we adopt. Have you
Good.
like, signed up for any committees? 'Cause right
So
now,
I'm looking at signing up for one of the committees right now.
because they're doing the IRC
Right,
now for the
for
next
the-
version of that, so that might be
Have you given feedback? Have you been a part of any of that?
I haven't.
Not yet.
participated
No.
correctly.
Okay. That's
Part of
great.
it because like you have to watch them because they're also a state board, which is kind of, if they don't have anything on the agenda, they won't meet.
I think we had a question back here.
I was just going to interject.
Oh, yeah, let's hear it.
I'm Tyler Brecken, two states that have done the sprinkler system reform bills statewide are Tennessee and North Carolina.
Yeah, North Carolina's one. Yeah, and I sent you
Kind of
that.
track those. So, I mean, they're not, progressive options.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's important. Tyler knows. But
Any other questions? Any other comments? Yeah.
I like how you mentioned long-term planning. Senator Mann had a couple of long-term planning bills, and we know the reality up there that they need to get a hearing committee. So, any good talking points with Republican leadership that you're having to kind of bring up those opportunities?
about talking about long-term thinking? Yeah, I'm pretty much a wet blanket on all that stuff. I mean, I am. It's like, I laugh at myself as a freshman legislator. My first year, my summer interim studies, we can pick any topic. That's the only time we're allowed to have testimony. I did deferred maintenance on state buildings as my interim study. Well, come to find out, that's not politically, nobody gets political points for catching us up on deferred maintenance, sadly. And so we're going to continue just doing the bare minimum, and it costs the people more, and it's not ideal space, and that's why our capital almost fell down, right? So I've learned to focus that down, not to make it so broad, because we don't want to do a holistic plan, apparently. But long term, it worked out because I hassled Senator Hall into it, who's now the appropriations chair, and last year he put some deferred maintenance money in he tried to create it as an endowment, so. I mean, even if I had a drop of influence on that, maybe it was progress. But, I mean, I think it's constituents asking. I mean, most people who call us are mad about something now. They're calling us saying, I want this changed today. And to have people say, I want you to plan ahead better, I want you to think ahead better, or how are you going to handle this in the future, like, I think that pushes people to think longer term. And then I think we make a decision about how we organize government. The governor has the latitude to create the executive structure he wants for his cabinet and advisors and stuff. I mean, maybe there's a push to make the governor have a planning secretary or something. I mean, I'm not suggesting that as the solution, but maybe there's something to push that mindset forward. I don't know. No.
I think that's honestly a really great question. As you're advancing some of these housing and planning related bills, like what kind of strategies do you find work best from like a bipartisan level? Like I'm very lucky to be represented by you. I often agree with the message that you're pushing, but maybe folks aren't so lucky to agree with their state senator. So when you've potentially got to convince your state senator to maybe engage in conversation, what are some of those bipartisan strategies you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is just to talk about, no one can deny your story. So somebody may disagree that housing is important, but if you have an issue in your neighborhood or with people you're working with that you can describe, like, people can't deny that, right? So number one, just tell your own story. But secondly, I mean, economic impact is always positive. I would just say nobody needs to have the perfect argument. I think a lot of people feel like they have to be able to explain the entire problem or explain the whole state before they can try to convince their legislator about stuff, but you don't have to at all. So coming in with some point, if you're a business person, talk about yourself as a business person first, and because that carries weight compared to an idea of somebody who might not be able to afford their home, which apparently doesn't carry as much weight, right? So I think starting there in terms of you and your own business, but making the economic arguments, we're trying to talk about things that limit our economic growth, things that limit people from being able to stay here, buy here, et cetera. I mean, right now for housing, I mean, I was very compelling. I was able to push, at least with one committee, because the banks and credit unions are saying that they're authorizing loans and people aren't able to use them because they can't find anywhere to buy. Well, that's pretty compelling when bankers and credit unions can't do their normal workflow, right? So I think pointing out those kinds of economic urgencies is worthwhile.
That's great. So I'll open it up. Questions. I also think it's not very often we get an audience with a state senator. So if you're like Austin and you have a particular single stair type issue that you feel so compelled to bring up, I also think that it's just important for people in this room to hear, you know, what is the thing that you really want to make sure is being talked about at the state capitol? What are things that you think that we in this room should be pushing forward? I will just take a quick second to remind everyone that ULI Oklahoma is a 501c3 and therefore not a formal lobbying organization. However, we do have a large membership and a broad reach with people, and we can make sure that we are being informative and make sure that our state senators are hearing from us. So if there are any topics that you want to bring up and talk about that maybe didn't make it through that you want to make sure we're discussing, I think that that's important as well. So got one right here. All right.
I'd love to talk about transit.
Great.
Yeah.
City transit, rural transit, in general.
Yeah.
Not just roads and bridges. I have to cover up my logo.
That's okay.
You're
That's
not
okay.
taking my own opinions.
Absolutely. Totally understood.
Yeah, just how is it seen at the
Yeah, I mean, very focused around roads and bridges, obsessed with roads and bridges, unwilling to talk about other things. I went a couple weeks ago, there's a new, we have kind of information-based caucuses that we do that are bipartisan, bicameral, to talk about specific issues. Like she talked about the mental health caucus. We have one specifically for disability issues, and we had the woman come there's one person who works for the Department of Transportation who is focused on mobility issues for people with disabilities. Or maybe she had got a second person, 2 people for the whole state, right? Now we have medical transport, which is one thing, but we don't have the other, right? And so we're spending, like the percentage of our budget that we're spending on anything other than roads and bridges is just shockingly low. I mean, we're spending minimum $600 million a year on just building roads and bridges, and plus whatever else is in that federal budget, which I don't even know the amount.
Like, how about we have the trust group, right? Transportation fund,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. I can't think of the rest of the acronym, but like, how could that be used better and not just for roads and bridges?
Do you think
Expand the word what transportation.
that's, I mean, so membership organizations, so they're a membership advocacy organization. You get influenced by being an active member and by being on their boards and stuff. I mean, if you wanted to shift their mindset, because they're paying for a lot of lobbying power at the Capitol, they pay for a lot of people to be there and be very active. I mean, I do think pushing everyone you talk to who's in elected office on it is worthwhile. I mean, we had a Putnam City School student, my favorite legislative event of the year is they ask all the Putnam City legislators that represent, and the high school kids get to ask us questions, and they don't hold back. Like they go hard. Like they want to talk about sex ed and racism and half the group is like, oh my gosh. And we have one guy who's like a lifelong transit guy, transportation guy. And they ask about public transit. And we all turned to him because we're like, finally something you can talk about. And he's like, oh, I have no idea. It was really embarrassing. I was like, all this time and you don't have anything to add? So I would say it's like almost invisible. And we have very fragmented conversations. I think if you could get the disability advocacy movement and the elder advocacy movement aligned with some other folks, you might actually get a little more power there to push for things. Because even if they spent 0.1% of the transportation budget on public, it would be amazing. Yeah.
So we've got 2 people joining commissions out of this meeting. What else do we want to talk about? Any other issues that, I mean, come on, you guys work on stuff all day long. What, yeah, let's hear it, Matt.
This is kind of an able commission question, but I think it ties into place making and urbanism. Type 1 and type 2 was having 35% of your revenue food threshold in order for people under 21 to be allowed inside, which precludes, I've seen this in like places I'm a patron of, but also run into it as a barrier on new development projects, and it precludes in some instances the creation of great places like Tiger Nation and Wheeler, where you can have kids there and also have bar or wine bar or something, and a place where kids are, parents are bringing their kids and sitting in the afternoon, probably not a place where, we're selling underage kids cheap beer. That's a lot I've always kind of had a hard time figuring out. I wonder if there's any, it's been surprisingly more frequently problematic than I would have expected.
Really?
I wonder if that's something we're ever doing.
I mean, alcohol policy in Oklahoma's gone through like total, complete 180 in 10 years. And so like when I came in, they just barely had passed liquor wine and beer in stores and grocery stores. And since then, like everything gets passed. So I think it's actually ripe for change. It's not easy. I'm not implying it's easy, but like it used to be with alcohol issues, you like couldn't get anything changed. And now, I mean, we're trotting like 10 alcohol-related bills through a year that are about expanding, breweries being able to distribute. And so, like, I think it's actually ripe. The big voices there are the Restaurant Association, the Tourism Association, the OTIA. And, I mean, liquor stores still chime in, but it's really the grocery stores and them that worry about it. But Restaurant Association is very vocal about able-related stuff, so I think you can push there. Yeah, there's been a lot of change. And so I don't think it's unheard of. And like the teetotaler caucus has gotten really small up there, so it's easier to pass things, I think. The other big voices, of course, I should have said, are the beer manufacturers and distributors, the liquor manufacturers and distributors. So like any allies that have lobbyists are really helpful because they have people up there full time working on it. And so if they think, oh, I'm going to be able to distribute my beer in more places or whatever, that's a great avenue to get lobbying power. You know.
I feel like I have 2 Garys here in the second row that are being really quiet, and I know you 2 have a lot to say.
He gets to talk to me plenty.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Okay. We'll give you a pass.
And that Gary can't say anything. It might get spicy really fast.
I do feel like Matt's question kind of brings up another thought. Like, talk about that, like, local control versus state control. Like, I know that there's a lot of friction on mandates coming in from the state level. I personally would love to see a change in how our municipality is funded, only having sales tax. Like, There's a lot of structures that I think make it difficult for cities. At the same time, Austin pointed out some great ways where you would have a totally different fight on, quadplexes than what Lisa is going to have on quadplexes. And so talk about kind of what that looks like. Is there a lot of communication there? Like, how is that control getting broken down these days?
It's not a clean line at all. There's not like a coherent strategy there, I don't think. And I think the big issue is, I think OML has a million fights, and so they are always trying to figure out which is the biggest fight, right? And trying to play defense a lot. It's hard for them to get to be proactive. And then smaller communities have different things that they feed back on. I would just say that on the funding front, I keep bringing up that that's our biggest tax reform we need is municipal tax reform to, broaden where they can get revenue. And there's zero temperature to do that. I just can't believe how disinterested. And I think it's because cities have been so successful at getting by the best they can with what they have. I mean, I don't know what city people think, but I think there's going to have to be more catastrophic failures for them to get around to it. And meanwhile, but we're backfilling from the state level, and I think this is when I get really nervous about being streamed. But, well, because I'm going to say, honestly, there's a lot of ways that the big cities are subsidizing rural water systems, we're now paying for some of the county roads and bridges. And so that's a decision our state has made to take money from the general revenues and send them to communities that haven't kept up their roads and bridges and their water systems and their sewer systems. So like when the ARPA money came through, we spent what? I think it was like $300 million on water and sewer systems. Every city in the state has problems there, but I'm saying some communities really haven't kept theirs up. And so that balance of like, are we requiring locals to spend, are they taxing themselves like we're taxing ourselves? Those kinds of questions are not really welcome. I've brought them up. They're very unwelcome. They say I'm anti-rural, but I'm not. I just want to make sure that we're not taxing my neighbors to pay for somebody else who doesn't want to pay for their sewer system, and that we're doing that fairly. And I think as long as we have the structures we have, that's going to be an issue. But it seems like it's going to take big failures to get to light a fire under us. There's, of course, in the past, there's been a big fight from our agricultural community because they don't want to end up getting taxed more, for their lands and their properties. And so that's been a lot of who's fought changes in municipal funding. We did pass, since I've arrived in the last 6 years, we passed something called public safety districts, but no communities have used it. So I think it's probably we made it too cumbersome to use. I'm looking at my city people because no one's even thought about doing it, but it was a huge drag out fight that year because they were trying to say that we should have more options to fund fire and police. I don't know what kind of level of crisis it's going to take for us to make change there.
Gary.
So I'm always up for a fight that I know I'm not going to win. But I guess my question is, what are some of the fights on the more kind of progressive side of things that you think have a little more opportunity? Like, where could we best invest kind of our energy, like in fighting some fights that actually have an opportunity to gain some traction?
The ground could shift at any moment, so I'll just say that sometimes opportunities come up that we don't know are coming. I didn't know housing was even a conversation until that Housing Stability Fund came out. I thought it was still just a total brick wall, and then it happened, and it just was the right time, right place, right money. So I think housing is one that surprised me with its ability to be of interest. I think enough communities are struggling with housing and seeing the challenges of that. We're still way behind. Our state hasn't dealt with it at all for many, many decades. I've been interested in, there's been an interesting alignment around land environmental issues. I'm saying that's even is a little bit of a stretch, but water access, clean water access has been a discussion that's been an interesting alignment of members from different sides of the aisle. Now, how to approach it has been a whole, we don't necessarily agree on that, but there has been an interesting, I would say there's more people on the, I would say far right, who are very interested in environmental issues from a different angle. And some of it's more libertarian approach, but it is wanting to protect land and protect free land. That's been interesting. I'm trying to think. Mental health has continued to be one. We don't necessarily want to deal with the causes, but we are a little more willing to deal with the result. I'll keep thinking about that, though.
So, we've talked a lot about underrepresented voices, how to get involved in the conversation. Obviously, a great way to get involved in the conversation is someone running for office, actually getting involved, things like that. So tell us, let's kind of wrap things up a little bit. Tell us your story, how you decided to run for office. You were working in arts and placemaking and things like that. What made you decide to throw your hat in the ring and do this crazy job that you're doing right now?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to even remember, but no. So I worked in the arts for many, many years. I ran Oklahoma Visual Arts Coalition, got to work with artists all over the state, trying to help people, in their creative small businesses all over the state, and really just fell in love with our state, fell in love with the potential here, and also just loved helping artists get the money they needed to do what they wanted to do, which it takes very little money for artists to be really thrilled. Kayla, we gave you a $500 grant, and you created a whole public interaction program back in the day. Anyway, So I'd done that for many years, but over time I got really interested in not just like this artist and their career, but how are they able to access health insurance? You know, what are the conditions that allow someone to pursue their creative interests? You know, big thing around, like I met so many people in their 40s and 50s who were coming back to their art because they'd given it up because someone told them, like, you can't make a living at that. And so even though maybe they didn't want to be an artist as a business, they had put it away, right? And so, like, how do we help our state make sure people get those opportunities early, and how do we encourage creative people to stay here? So I got really interested in the systems, and then I ran the advocacy organization that lobbied for funding for the arts and for public art. But at the same time, my kids started public school, and so they went to my neighborhood public school, Cleveland Elementary, and OKCPS. From the very beginning, it was the midst of budget cuts, which we didn't have robust budget to start with, and then watching those budget cuts really got me motivated and helping other parents speak up for concerns. And I got pretty alarmed the closer I watched at how the decisions were being made about money and planning and the lack of interest in what was really happening in our communities. So that motivated me. And I thought, and when I cracked the door, the very next week, David Holt told me he wasn't running again, and he was my senator. So.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. You have 6 years left on your
Yeah.
12-year. Okay, so somebody starts your 6-year clock if you live in District 30.
No, there's lots of elections before then. There's lots of elections. But no, seriously, like, I think for me too, like, I happen to be around some people who were elected or were involved with encouraging candidates. So, I mean, even if you've totally just not considered it, but you'd be open to discussing it, like, talk to people about it, because people are willing to help you really consider it. And I think we need a diversity of perspectives in elected office at all levels, and I think at the state level, there's only like 2 of us that come from a nonprofit background. There's maybe 2 of us that have any arts relation, you know, so it's like we really need different voices up there, you know. Yeah.
That's great. Or join a commission or a committee or whatever. Yes. Yep. No, it's on my list, Cassie. I'm getting to it. Okay. So if you enjoyed the conversation about housing, a couple things I want to make sure you have on your radar. First, April 17th, we have a ULI Oklahoma tour of the Casitas, which is the Catholic Charities Affordable Housing Project over near Stockyards. Make sure you sign up for that. We also have a spring social coming up on the 21st at Angry Scotsman. Definitely don't want to miss out on that. But the big one that I want to make sure you have on your radar is on April 23rd, ULI National has the Home Attainability Index. If you're not familiar with this tool, go log into your Knowledge Finder and get familiar with it between now and the 23rd, because they just did a giant 2025 update to it. It's an amazing tool where you can deep dive into 30 some odd different statistics that we have locally here to Oklahoma City. You can see that for probably about 200 different cities across the United States. There's a lot of comparison that you can do. You can go back and look at previous years. But there is a webinar coming up on the 23rd where the people who built the tool are actually going to walk you through it, how it works, all of the cool stuff you can do with it. So that's an amazing tool that being a ULI member gets you, and so I want to make sure that everyone has the 23rd on their radar. As Cassie said, if you've not voted yet today, you have an election if you're in county commissioner race, Edmond Public Schools, Ward 7. There's a lot of stuff going on, so make sure you go vote. You've got exactly 2 hours left. Please help me thank Senator Kirt for her time today. We are so thankful that she came. And yes, go vote.